We've explored, tested, and compared tons of different plastics in a lot of different ways. Base, premium, lightweight, recycled, glow, old, new, cheap, expensive, and everything in between. But it's not every day you get to test premium plastic made from plants. So let's find out what Clash's new Planty line is all about, because the plastic is in the details. Hey everyone, it's Greg from Six Sided Discs, and these 4 discs are made of something called bioplastic. And while I spend a lot of time researching plastics and comparing them in a practical sense, there's still a lot that I don't know. So today we'll get insight from another person who spends a lot of time exploring plastics and manufacturing, who you may know, Jesse from Trash Panda. But before we chat with Jesse and before we see how these discs feel and fly, we need to talk more about bioplastic and how it relates to other terms you've probably heard both on our channel and across the disc golf industry. Bioplastic's defining characteristic is that it's not made from petroleum-based oil products like traditional plastics. But there are different types of bioplastic. Polylactic acid, also known as PLA, is made from the sugars in cornstarch, cassava, and sugarcane. But there's another type of bioplastic called PHA, or polyhydroxyalkanoate, which is made by microorganisms that produce plastics from organic materials. My understanding is that either of these can be used to make thermoplastic polyurethane, or TPU, which is a common plastic used in disc golf manufacturing. Now, we've actually thrown some bioplastic on our channel before from Bernoulli discs with their bio-based glow plastic, but there wasn't a lot of supplemental information available on their products. In this case, Clash Discs does at least provide some information about their Planty bioplastic. On their website, they say that it's crafted without the predominant use of conventional petroleum-derived products. They also say that Planty is not biodegradable, nor is it made with any recycled materials. Now, I reached out to Clash for more information on Planty and to answer some of the questions raised by their marketing here, but they didn't respond before this video was scheduled to release. So if and when they respond later, I will add their response as a pinned comment below this video. Back to these 3 key points though, and there are a couple things that I have questions about, which is why I reached out to Clash in the first place, because some of the terms used in bioplastic can lead to some confusion about what it is and what it can actually do. So let's take a moment to chat with Jesse about his initial thoughts on Planty, what bioplastic is, and where we think some of this confusion might be coming from. Jesse, firstly, thank you very much for taking some time to chat with me today. This is super fun. We got to meet at the expo, and we've now we go way back. I think it's been like a year and a half or something like that. The reason that we're talking today is not so much Trash Panda, or I guess more your expertise that sort of comes, your experience that comes from recycling discs. So I'm working on a video about Planty, Clash's new bioplastic. Curious about some of the stuff that they said about it. I was researching bioplastics. You and I have both done videos about Bernoulli, who talks about bioplastics. In the marketing materials from Clash, who I have reached out to and haven't heard back from prior to this conversation, it says that Planty is a bio-based material crafted without the predominant use of conventional petroleum-derived components.
I first and foremost want to just give Clash a shout out here to say, like, there's a lot of clarity in these words. You mentioned a company that you and I both have talked about in a previous video that, like, there wasn't a lot of clarity in their marketing materials, and there's a lot of clarity here. So I think it's really cool because to do something novel, you really have to say what it is. And especially in plastics, I think plastics are one of the most misunderstood things in our world because of how readily used plastics are. I mean, there's not a person watching this video who doesn't use plastic every single day.
Yeah.
It's so used in our life, but how understood it is so not there. So, like, you know, there's a lot of people who think a plastic water bottle would make a good disc, and they're just completely different types of plastics. I was one of those people when I started Trash Panda. So, like, the first thing I tried was a Tide detergent bottle. I was like, this is flexible, this is grippy, this should work. And it did not work. And so it's really, plastics are really misunderstood because there's just not a lot of, like, people aren't front facing talking a lot about the information. So I have to commend Clash for being out front with it without the predominant use of conventional petroleum derived components. So let's talk about all of this. So Bio-based, bio-based simply means plastics are typically made from petroleum or crude oil. And people have often heard the word non-renewable resource. Basically, what that means is this crude oil, yes, it comes from the earth and it is renewing, but it's not renewing fast enough compared to the rate of consumption. So we as humans are using so much that it's non-renewable because at a certain point, we're basically outpacing the renewing of it, if you will. And so we'll have used up all that exists. Anything can become a non-renewable resource if we outpace consumption. Yeah. So currently, plant-based oils are a renewable resource because they renew faster than we're currently using them. But if you look at everything in moderation, at the end of the day, if the entire plastics industry switched over to bio-based, at the end of the day, I haven't done the math to see, and I don't know how quickly plant oils renew compared to like crude oil. But everything in moderation at the end of the day. So it's still using a resource. It's just using a renewable resource. So I think point number one is renewable resource, right? Yeah. That's renewable versus non-renewable. What's interesting is they say without the predominant use. So that tells me
that's a key thing that I asked them about. So I'm hoping that I get a response in time before this video is hitting the schedule, but we'll see what that means.
Yeah, I'd be super curious. I mean, if I was to take it at face value, it means that there is both bio-based and petroleum-based plastics in this Planty.
So as Jesse explained, the wording does seem a little odd. The wording without the predominant use makes it sound like there is some petroleum-based oil used. And if so, I would like to know how much. I'm not necessarily saying that's a bad thing. I just want to know. Let's move on to the second item that Clash highlights about Planty, that bioplastic does not mean biodegradable. And I agree with Jesse that this is a very important point that they make. But it also goes on to say that Planty is not biodegradable, which I guess I sort of assumed it would be, but of course I understand like bioplastic, biodegradable. There's like a lot of terminology in there. It's crafted from those materials, but doesn't necessarily make it biodegradable, which they are sort of spinning as a selling point because then it makes it more durable to, bash into trees, which I can understand. You're trying to like thread a needle there.
Bioplastic simply means that it did not use crude oil, it used plant oil.
Right.
I'm not a chemist. I don't know really when it comes down to it exactly how a biodegradable plastic is made, but basically a biodegradable plastic also uses, actually I'm going to say something that's an assumption for me. I'm not even sure if it uses crude oil or plant oil, but it's made in a way that it can degrade.
Right, exactly. So the term that I have looked up, and this is also included elsewhere in the video, so we'll repeat it anyways. Biodegradable is a term used to describe the ability for an item to be completely broken down into water, carbon dioxide, and compost by microorganisms. So if it can't do that, whatever it is, then it's not biodegradable. And that's considered over a space of like weeks to months. So,
Well, so here's where we're going to get now. You mentioned that you brought me on because of my expertise. I will asterisk that and say that you brought me on because I look into this a decent amount and I've studied this and I work in this space, but I'm still learning a bunch every single day.
Sure.
I haven't looked a ton into bioplastics and biodegradable plastics because there is so much recycled plastic out there. That's my focus at the moment. There's just so much that already exists. To me, it makes sense to use recycled plastic before even using bio-based, simply because, not saying we won't ever do it at Trash Panda, but simply because bio-based still has to be created and there's something that's already been created that we can use. The second thing is that it's not biodegradable. So this is where we get into the fact that bioplastic and biodegradable plastic are two different things. Like, when people say bio-based, there's the assumption that, bio and biodegradable are such close to each other in words that it's almost like bio is just an abbreviated version of biodegradable, right? And so getting out in front of that and being clear about it, I think is super helpful. As far as biodegradable, it's my understanding that again, we're going to get into, there's biodegradable plastics, there's compostable plastics. I know there are certain biodegradable plastics that will biodegrade in a biodegrading facility. So certain humidity, certain temperature, certain environmental constraints, it will get broken down into those components. But if you just throw a disc into the woods and it goes and sits under a tree or it sits in the water or something, that's not necessarily going to be that same humidity, temp, microorganism availability to break it down. So it gets really tricky. And the word biodegradable seems to be that I can yeet this thing into the middle of the pond on hole 8 at Maple Hill, and I don't have to worry about it because it'll just be washed away with everything else.
Right.
And again, going back to it, that's why I want to commend Clash. Just the fact that they are out front and saying that they could not have point number 2 here. Just say that it's bio-based. They are not lying.
They could just say that it's durable. Right.
Yeah.
They don't have to explain why.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And they're being totally honest and saying, hey, this is exactly what it is. But to tell you what it's not, which is a common misconception that like a lot of companies would leave bio-based and it would be referred to as greenwashing, where it's just like making something seem more sustainable than it is. If they didn't tell you it wasn't biodegradable, we would all think it's biodegradable. And so I have to commend them for that. It's a deep rabbit hole as far as what is truly biodegradable. And even the one company who has a disc out there who says they have a biodegradable disc, they're in production on that disc, or in development, I should say, research and development. The disc isn't even there because you and I both haven't gotten them, and we've been in direct contact with them asking to get them. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, will that make a good disc? We'll see.
So this whole thing about whether the plastic is biodegradable is not an exclusive sort of issue to Clash. Bioplastic is not necessarily biodegradable. Biodegradable is a term used to describe the ability for an item to be completely broken down into water, carbon dioxide, and compost, usually over the course of several months. If a bioplastic is not biodegradable, it won't completely break down and could therefore still be harmful to the environment. Now, if you want to learn more specifically about bioplastics, I highly recommend reading the article that I used in my research for this video from the Columbia University Climate School. The link is in the video description. Bioplastic in general seems to be a concept that Clash is trying to thread the needle with a bit. While Planty's not biodegradable, they consider that a good thing because it can, quote, withstand the demands of the sport, which is obviously a reference to durability. They also go on to say that Planty is a novel material free from recycled content, which brings up other questions like what of their products aren't novel and free from recycled content. And I think this adds to some of the confusion. Is this really responsible disc golf bioplastic, or is it marketing? What's it actually made from? Can it be recycled? Because one-time use bioplastic still has an environmental cost. Now, I am by no means an expert on plastics. I do spend a lot of time reading about them and trying to learn about them. But when it comes to recycled discs, recycling plastics, and how any of that works, I do know someone who knows about that.
I don't know why point number 3 is on there, if I'm being honest. Planty is a novel biomaterial entirely free from recycled content. I'm not sure I understand why they say that. Again, they're being clear about what it is, so that's cool. But yeah, it's a bio-based plastic, and I guess it doesn't have any recycled plastic in it. So, cool. Is it recyclable? I would think so. They haven't said that it's thermoplastic polyurethane, but if it is thermoplastic polyurethane, then it is. But to know for sure, I'd probably have to grind one up and throw it through my machine to see. This whole thing is pretty clear. They're pretty open with what they do. So I would think they would answer if you said, hey, point number 3 says it's entirely free from recycled content. Just curious, can it be recycled? That'd be an interesting ask. So, yeah. The bio-based materials are so new that the downstream need to recycle them is not as, like, again, bio-TPU is such a new thing that we really don't, like, I haven't seen bio-TPU in a place that needs to recycle it all that much. but I'm sure there are manufacturers out there who have a ton of it that does need to be recycled. So yeah, I would be curious. Like, you started to go into the rabbit hole to study this and you had questions. We all do. The biggest request is that manufacturers are just clear about what their stuff is. And that's why, again, I got to commend them for what they're doing. It's 99% clear. It's just so new that there's a couple of caveat questions in there. But like, that's also for us why 100% recycled is so important, because there's so much clarity when we say 100%.
Yeah.
If we say recycled and there's no percentage, what is it? You know, it's crazy because there's like, yeah, the difference between 1 and 99 and the difference between 100. It's like, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's
it could be anything. It could be anything.
Yeah,
Any combination of stuff.
And don't get me wrong, any amount is good. Like, let's go. Any amount is worth it. I think 100% is very worth it, but any amount is more than the person before you did, you know?
Yeah,
so
for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Jesse, with respect to Planty, I really appreciate your insights and your thoughts on that, and thank you for adding something to our content here. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Of course.
Huge thank you to Jesse for taking the time to talk with us today. If you somehow don't already know Jesse and Trash Panda, make sure you check out Trash Panda Disc Golf on YouTube, or check out their website where they make 100% recycled discs. Now, my only interest with all these questions and research and seeking answers and insights is that I want to learn more about these products, the ways that they're made, and pass that information on to you. So let's talk about some stuff that I do know about Planty. First off, Planty plastic feels fantastic. I mean, that's obviously not a fact, that's my opinion, but factually speaking, it is a premium plastic. It's definitely a bit softer than their steady plastic. But what's impressive to me is that if it didn't say Planty and bioplastic all over it, I wouldn't be surprised if you told me it was a regular premium plastic. Some other facts that I can provide is how they fly, at least for us. And today we have 4 different molds in Planty plastic, 2 of which that we've actually thrown before on our channel, and 2 that we haven't. Let's begin with the putter that we have, the Candy. The Candy is a deep beadless putter and feels similar to the Discraft Luna. And with flight numbers of 33, -11, I would expect it to fly a little bit like the Luna as well. And it pretty much does. Thrown on a slight hyzer, it flips to flat, gets a very brief turn before a small fade. Not bad at all. But let's take a look at a disc we have thrown before, the Berry. Rated at 5.5, -11, we threw the Berry in part 2 of our straightest mid-range comparison. But in that video, it wasn't very straight. It was actually slightly overstable. Today, thrown on a slight hyzer, it does show some stability as well, flipping flat only briefly. But if you throw it closer to flat, you can get a nice minimal turn before it fades back, creating a pretty straight shot. Onto another disc that we've thrown before, this is the Planty Millet. The Millet in steady ring plastic featured in our flight numbers don't matter comparison of understable fairway drivers. And boy, was it understable. Rated at 7.6, -3.1, the Millet is every bit as understable as advertised. It's super domey, and right out of the hand it wants to turn and glide some more. So far, we're not seeing any difference in stability or performance from Planty compared to Clash's steady plastic. But let's take a look at the last disc we have to test today, the Vanilla. The Vanilla is a disc that I've never thrown before, and it's rated at 11.6, -2.1, which puts it in stiff competition with some popular recently released discs like the Innova Gorgon. But the Vanilla's design is interesting. It looks and feels a lot more to me like a destroyer. And so before I knew how it was supposed to fly, I was expecting a lot more overstability. But luckily for me, I was wrong about its stability, because when this shot left my hand, I was certain it was going straight into the river on the left. But much to my surprise, it actually did show a little bit of turn, just holding over the fairway long enough to stay dry. It wasn't until I tried the Vanilla on forehand that the understability became painfully obvious.
Almost died.
Now, in most of our videos, I feel like it's pretty easy to wrap up and summarize what we learned and how we feel about it in a nice, pretty bow. But today, I'm struggling. Planty feels amazing, And the discs fly great. I don't have a single negative thing to say about any of that. I think the only thing that isn't making this a slam dunk from my perspective is this one little word choice on the website: predominant use. What does that mean? And if it means that it has some petroleum-based plastic, how much and why? Is that necessary to make the plastic feel more like a regular premium plastic? Is it necessary for it to be more durable? I just want answers. For now, I can say Planty is a quality plastic. It looks good, it feels good, and it flies pretty close to Clash's standard plastics. And I agree with Jesse that I appreciate Clash trying to provide some clear information about Planty. But the more that I look at that information, the less clear it feels. Clash, if you're watching, I would love some more information, so feel free to get in touch. What do you all think of Planty and bioplastics in general? Let us know in the comments below. And also comment below other plastic-related tests and comparisons you'd like to see in the future. For Six Sided Discs, I'm Greg. We'll see you in the next one. And while I spend a lot of time exploring and researching, plastics and comparing them in a practical sense, there's still a lot that I don't know. In this case, Clash Discs does at least provide some information about my understanding from the wording without the predominant use makes it sound like some. And while I spend a lot of time researching and comparing, and what am I trying to say?
Almost dead.
Bye. If you like this content and want to see more, please consider liking the video, subscribing to our channel, or supporting us on Patreon. Your support makes this content possible.